I was rushing to work trying to beat the morning traffic, so I grabbed my husband's phone off the kitchen counter by mistake. As soon as I boarded the train, my sister-in-law called. I answered, intending to tell her she had the wrong person, but the very first thing she talked about made my blood run absolutely ice cold. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your trust completely shattered by the person sleeping next to you. My name is Kendra, and I am 33 years old. I built my career in wealth management from the ground up, fighting for every single promotion and client I ever had. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood taught me the value of a dollar and the importance of financial independence. My husband Jamal is an investment broker, or at least he likes to project the image of a highly successful one. We had identical black smartphones in identical black cases. That morning, my mind was already racing ahead to a massive portfolio review I had scheduled for 9 o'clock. I snatched what I thought was my phone from the marble kitchen island, grabbed my briefcase, and practically ran out the door to catch the commuter train into the city. I found a window seat and settled in for the 40-minute ride. I reached into my bag to check my emails and froze. The lock screen background was not my carefully organized calendar widget. It was a picture of Jamal and his white stepsister, Peyton, smiling at a country club event I had deliberately skipped. Peyton is the golden child of our blended family. Jamal's father, Elias, married Peyton's mother, Susan, when Jamal and Peyton were teenagers. Susan has spent the last decade coddling Peyton while delivering relentless passive-aggressive remarks about my ambition and my background. I was just about to put the phone back in my bag and dig out my own when the screen lit up with an incoming call. The caller ID flashed Peyton in large, bright letters. I figured I would just answer and tell her that Jamal had left his phone at home and I had taken it by mistake. I pressed the green accept button and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not even get a chance to say hello. Peyton's voice came through the speaker, breathless, frantic, and dripping with a sickening kind of triumph. Jamal, thank God you picked up. The $250,000 wire from Kendra's business equity just cleared into the escrow account. The luxury salon space in Midtown is officially mine. I just signed the final paperwork. Did you get the divorce papers drawn up yet? Make sure she is served before she thinks to check the accounts. You promised me she would be out of the house by the end of the month. The rhythmic clacking of the train wheels against the tracks seemed to vanish. The low murmur of the other commuters faded into absolute static. I did not gasp. I did not scream. I did not drop the phone. Years of navigating high-stakes corporate boardrooms and managing multi-million-dollar portfolios had trained me to remain completely composed under extreme pressure. My blood turned to ice water, but my hand was perfectly steady. I pressed the mute button on the screen, cutting off the microphone. I sat there in silence, listening to my husband's stepsister babble excitedly about the designer fixtures she was going to buy for her new salon using my hard-earned money. She rambled on about how Jamal was finally putting his real family first and how they were going to celebrate tonight. I calmly pressed the red button and ended the call. There were no tears. Tears are for people who do not know what to do next. I am a wealth management consultant. When someone targets my assets, I do not cry. I go to war. I needed to understand exactly how deep this betrayal went, and I needed to do it quickly. Jamal was likely waking up right about now, realizing his phone was gone. I had maybe 30 minutes before he panicked and tried to remotely lock the device. I swiped up on the screen. The passcode prompt appeared. Jamal has always been incredibly predictable and fiercely desperate for his stepmother's approval. I typed in Susan's birth date. The phone unlocked immediately. I opened his text messages and navigated straight to his conversation thread with Peyton. What I saw there was not just a story of financial theft. It was a complete assassination of my character and our marriage. I did not just read about their betrayal. I saw it meticulously documented in blue and gray text bubbles stretching back for months. I scrolled up to a conversation from 3 weeks ago. Peyton had sent a long message complaining about me. Kendra makes me so uncomfortable, Jamal. She is always flaunting her money and her fancy degrees at family dinners. She acts like she is better than us just because she made partner. Why does she even need that much equity in her firm anyway? It is not fair that my salon loan got rejected when she has all that cash just sitting there doing nothing. She does not even support our family. Jamal's response made my stomach churn. Do not worry, Pei. I am taking care of it. I am tired of her running the show and acting like she is the boss of my life. I am getting the paperwork ready. We will get your salon funded. I am going to level the playing field so you can have your dream. She is just a cash cow anyway. I am making sure we are secure before I drop the papers on her. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. He was weaponizing my success to soothe his own insecurities and buy the affection of a stepsister who had never worked a hard day in her life. Peyton had always weaponized her fragility using tears and manufactured crises to manipulate the family into funding her lifestyle. Jamal, deeply insecure about his own mediocre performance as an investment broker, had decided to play the hero by sacrificing his wife. I kept scrolling, absorbing every sickening detail. I saw messages where Jamal complained about my working-class roots, mocking the way my relatives spoke at our wedding. I saw texts where Peyton encouraged him to clean out the joint savings account before he filed the divorce papers. They had mapped out an entire strategy to leave me financially ruined while launching Peyton into high society as a self-made female entrepreneur. My phone vibrated in my purse. My actual phone. I pulled it out and saw 3 missed calls from Jamal. He was awake. He knew the phone was gone. The clock was ticking faster now. I placed my phone back in my bag and focused entirely on Jamal's device. I needed to see exactly how he had managed to bypass the security on my business equity account. As his wife, I had trusted him with certain financial disclosures, but my business equity was locked behind layers of authentication. I opened his email app and searched my own name. There it was. An email chain between Jamal and a sketchy online notary service. He had forged my digital signature on a power of attorney document. He had used that fraudulent document to authorize a massive withdrawal against my partnership equity, framing it as a joint marital investment for a commercial real estate venture. He had literally stolen $250,000 right out from under me while smiling in my face at the dinner table. The train announced the upcoming stop for the financial district. I had exactly 10 minutes before I reached my office building. 10 minutes to transform from a betrayed wife into the most dangerous opponent Jamal and Peyton had ever faced. I opened Jamal's banking application. Once again, the passcode was Susan's birthday. The accounts loaded on the screen showing the precise routing numbers and timestamps of the wire transfer that had just cleared into Peyton's escrow account. I took screenshots of everything: the forged notary emails, the text messages where they planned the theft, the banking confirmations, the messages to his divorce attorney outlining his intent to hide assets. I emailed every single screenshot to my secure private server and then permanently deleted the sent messages from his outbox. I slipped his phone into my coat pocket and took a deep breath. The raw shock had entirely evaporated, replaced by a terrifying crystal-clear focus. Jamal thought he could outsmart a woman who managed generational wealth for a living. He thought he could steal the foundation I had built with my own 2 hands and hand it over to a woman who despised me simply for existing and thriving in spaces she felt entitled to. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed that because I kept the peace at family gatherings, I was weak. They mistook my professional composure for docility. The train screeched to a halt at my station. The doors slid open and I stepped out onto the platform. I did not walk like a woman whose marriage had just ended. I walked like a woman who was about to orchestrate the most methodical financial execution in corporate history. The $250,000 was just the beginning of their plan, but it was also going to be the instrument of their absolute destruction. I checked my own phone. 7 missed calls from Jamal now. Let him sweat. Let him pace the house wondering if I had looked at his screen. He had no idea that I already held all the keys to his kingdom, and I was about to lock him out permanently. I headed straight for the escalators leading up to the street level, ready to make my first move. I stared at the glowing screen of Jamal's phone as the train rattled along the tracks. My thumb hovered over the glass, but my hands were completely steady. I did not feel the sudden urge to cry or scream. When you grow up in a neighborhood where every dollar is a battle, and you claw your way up to the top floors of corporate wealth management, you learn very quickly that panic is a luxury you cannot afford. Panic costs you money. Panic costs you your leverage. I had exactly 12 minutes before my train pulled into the financial district, and I was going to use every single second to completely dismantle my husband's plan. I navigated away from the text messages and opened his email application. I typed the word divorce into the search bar. A chain of emails instantly populated the screen. Jamal had been communicating with a cheap suburban attorney for the past 3 weeks. I opened the most recent thread and read it line by line. The strategy they had mapped out was sickeningly precise. Jamal detailed exactly how he planned to drain my business equity under the guise of a joint marital real estate venture. He explained to the lawyer that once the funds were safely wired and cleared into an irrevocable commercial escrow account controlled entirely by Peyton, he would serve me with divorce papers. He actually wrote that I was too obsessed with managing my clients' portfolios to notice a few missing account alerts on my own. He thought my relentless dedication to securing our financial future was just a convenient blind spot he could exploit. The sheer arrogance of a man who could barely balance his own checking account trying to outmaneuver a woman who structured 8-figure portfolios for a living was genuinely staggering. But it was the emails between Jamal and his stepsister Peyton that truly revealed the depth of the betrayal. Peyton had forwarded him links to high-end Italian salon chairs and custom marble reception desks. She complained about how unfair it was that I had so much capital tied up in my firm, while she, a visionary entrepreneur, had been denied a business loan. And Jamal, my husband, the man who swore to protect me, replied that he was going to put me in my place and take back what was rightfully his. He promised to fund her vanity project with the money I had earned working 80-hour weeks. I took screenshots of every single email, every attached document, and every timeline they had drafted. I captured the wire transfer confirmations, the routing numbers to Peyton's commercial escrow account, and the text messages where Susan, his mother, had chimed in to say I deserved to be knocked down a peg because I was getting far too arrogant for my own good. I sent the entire digital dossier directly to my secure private cloud server. Once the upload was complete, I systematically deleted the sent folder on his phone, wiping away any trace that the information had been forwarded. I checked the time. 8 minutes left. I pulled my actual phone from my leather briefcase and dialed a direct line that retail banking customers do not even know exists. As a wealth management consultant handling high net worth individuals, I do not wait on hold for a customer service representative. An agent from the elite corporate fraud division answered on the second ring. I kept my voice perfectly level, devoid of any emotion. I verified my identity using my security PIN and my biometric passphrase. Then I dropped the hammer. I informed the agent that a highly sophisticated wire fraud event had just occurred on my primary business equity account. I explicitly flagged the $250,000 transfer as unauthorized, fraudulent, and executed under false pretenses. I instructed them to initiate an immediate federal clawback protocol to rip those funds right out of Peyton's pending escrow. The agent began typing rapidly, but I did not stop there. I ordered a complete and total lockdown on every single financial vehicle associated with my Social Security number. I froze my personal checking accounts, my business operating accounts, our joint savings, my investment portfolios, and all attached credit lines. The agent warned me that a total systemic freeze would result in the immediate decline of all pending transactions, including automated bill payments and any active credit cards Jamal might be holding. I told him to do it anyway. I pictured Peyton standing in some luxury leasing office in Midtown, a glass of cheap celebratory champagne in her manicured hand, waiting for the final confirmation to clear so she could sign the lease. I pictured the exact moment the commercial real estate agent would look at their computer screen and tell her the funds had been violently reversed and frozen pending a massive fraud investigation. Peyton's entire empire built on my stolen money was collapsing before it even opened its doors. The train lurched as it began its final descent into the financial district station. I slipped Jamal's phone into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. I stood up and smoothed out the fabric of my pencil skirt. The woman who had boarded this train 30 minutes ago was a dedicated, supportive wife rushing to work to provide for her family. That woman was dead. In her place stood a corporate predator who knew exactly how to financially ruin someone brick by brick. I stepped off the train and merged with the rushing sea of morning commuters. The crisp city air hit my face as I ascended the concrete stairs to the street level. I marched down the avenue toward my office building, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement in a steady, rhythmic cadence. I did not feel heartbroken. I felt entirely weaponized. Every step I took was a calculation. Every breath was strategy. Jamal and Peyton wanted to play a ruthless game of assets and acquisitions, but they had fundamentally misunderstood who they were playing against. I walked through the heavy revolving glass doors of my corporate headquarters. The morning rush was in full swing, with suits rushing past holding coffees and briefcases. I bypassed the main reception desk and made my way to the private elevator bank reserved exclusively for senior partners and executives. I swiped my security badge and stepped into the plush cab, watching the digital floor numbers tick rapidly upward. I pulled a compact mirror from my bag, checked my lipstick, and took one final centering breath. The soft chime sounded. The polished steel doors slid open to the expansive marble lobby of my firm's executive floor. I stepped out expecting to greet my receptionist and head straight to my corner office to call my attorney. Instead, I stopped dead in my tracks. Standing right in the middle of the reception area, sweating profusely through his custom dress shirt and pacing the floor like a trapped animal, was Jamal. His face was flushed a dark, furious red. His tie was loosened and he was breathing heavily. But he was not alone. He was flanked on either side by two of our building's burly security guards who looked highly agitated by his presence. The moment the elevator doors parted, his head snapped in my direction. His eyes locked onto mine wide with a volatile mixture of sheer panic and unhinged rage. He lunged forward, closing the distance between us in heavy, aggressive strides. He raised his arm, his finger pointing directly at my face, ready to ignite the very public, explosive confrontation he thought would break my composure and force me into submission. Jamal's heavy footsteps echoed across the polished marble floor of the executive lobby. He did not bother with a greeting. He lunged directly at me with his hand swiping aggressively toward my coat pocket where he assumed his device was hiding. I pivoted sharply on my heel. I let his own reckless momentum carry him past me. He stumbled awkwardly and his expensive leather loafers skidded against the slick stone. He caught his balance and spun around with his face contorted into a mask of pure manufactured outrage. He raised his voice deliberately, making sure it bounced off the cavernous ceiling. "Give me my property right now, Kendra. You are acting completely unhinged." The morning rush around us ground to an immediate halt. Dozens of my colleagues, junior analysts, and senior managing partners froze in their tracks. Jamal turned his attention to the two towering security guards flanking the reception desk. "My wife has a severe paranoia problem," he declared loudly, pointing an accusing finger at me. "She stole my phone this morning because she is obsessed with tracking my every move. She is out of control. I want her searched." He was playing a very specific and very dangerous game. He was trying to paint me as the stereotypical angry and irrational woman in front of my predominantly white corporate firm. He wanted to trigger their biases, hoping the sheer embarrassment of a public domestic dispute would force me to hand over the phone and submit just to make the scene go away. He severely underestimated my discipline. I did not raise my voice. I did not scowl. I maintained absolute perfect posture. I reached calmly into my tailored blazer, retrieved his smartphone, and placed it gently on the elevated security console right in front of the head guard. "My husband left this on the kitchen counter in his rush this morning," I stated. My voice was smooth, professional, and loud enough to carry to the spectators. I brought it to him so he would not miss any important calls. "You are welcome, Jamal." The security guards immediately stepped back, and their defensive postures relaxed as they realized there was no theft occurring here. The murmuring crowd lost interest and turned back to their coffees and elevators. Jamal looked momentarily victorious. He snatched his phone off the console with a smug and arrogant smile, touching the corners of his mouth. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully bullied me into compliance. That was when I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my own phone. I tapped the screen to unlock it and held the device up, positioning it just inches from his face. His eyes darted down to the glowing display. It was the direct banking confirmation from my corporate fraud division. Bold red text was stamped across the top of the digital receipt, indicating a total frozen asset hold on the $250,000 wire transfer to Peyton's commercial escrow account. I watched the precise second his soul left his body. His aggressive and chest-puffed posture deflated instantly like a punctured tire. The arrogant smirk vanished and was replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. His jaw physically dropped. His hands began to tremble so violently that he nearly dropped his own phone onto the marble floor. The man who was just shouting about my paranoia was suddenly struggling to draw breath. His voice dropped from a theatrical booming shout to a desperate and pathetic whisper. He stepped so close to me I could smell the stale coffee and sour panic radiating off his breath. "Kendra, wait, please," he stammered with his eyes darting around frantically to see if anyone was listening. "You do not understand. You have to undo that right now." I did not answer him. I turned my back and walked toward the secure glass double doors leading to my department's private elevator bank. I swiped my badge and stepped through. Jamal scrambled right after me and swiped his spousal visitor pass just to keep up. He trailed behind me like a desperate shadow as we stepped into the empty elevator cab. The moment the door slid shut, isolating us in the mirrored box, his entire demeanor shattered. He grabbed my arm, but I shot him a look so lethally cold that he immediately released me and shrank back against the handrail. "Peyton is in deep financial trouble, Kendra," he lied while his voice cracked with manufactured distress. "She got mixed up with some very dangerous shadow lenders. These loan sharks are threatening to take everything she has. They are threatening to ruin her life. I had to borrow the equity. I had to do it. I was going to put every single penny right back into your account after my quarterly bonus clears next month. I swear to you I was just protecting my sister." I stared at him in total silence as the elevator climbed. He was actually trying to sell me a sob story about loan sharks when I had already read the text messages where Peyton sent him links to custom Italian leather salon chairs and imported marble reception desks. He thought I was ignorant. He thought he could still spin this narrative and play the protective and noble brother. The doors chimed and opened to my executive floor. I walked past my assistant, who stared wide-eyed at Jamal's disheveled state, and I stepped straight into my expansive corner office. Jamal scurried in right behind me and kicked the heavy oak door shut. The moment we were entirely alone, he physically dropped to his knees beside my mahogany desk. A grown man in a custom-tailored suit was kneeling on my office carpet. "We built this life together," he pleaded with actual tears welling up in his eyes. He pressed his hands together in a begging motion. "You are my wife, Kendra. You cannot do this to me. You cannot ruin my family over a misunderstanding. Just pick up the phone, call the bank, and authorize the release of those funds. Peyton will pay us back with interest, I promise you." I did not even look at him. I did not acknowledge his tears or his pathetic display of submission. I placed my leather briefcase on the guest chair, walked around to my side of the desk, and sat down in my high-backed leather chair. I folded my hands neatly on the pristine desktop. Just as I settled in, the multi-line phone on my desk lit up. The private direct line rang loudly, cutting through Jamal's desperate sobbing. I looked at the caller ID display flashing brightly on the digital screen. It was a number I recognized immediately. Jamal had panicked on his way to my office this morning, and he had called in the cavalry for backup. It was Susan. I pressed the flashing speaker button on my mahogany desk console. I did not say a word. I just leaned back in my high-backed leather chair and let the silence hang in the air. Susan did not bother with a greeting. Her voice echoed through my corner office, sharp and dripping with the kind of wealthy suburban entitlement that had grated on my nerves for the last 5 years. "Kendra, you need to call your bank and fix this immediately. Jamal just told me you froze the wire transfer for Peyton's salon. You are being completely unreasonable." I looked down at Jamal. He was still kneeling on my office carpet, his face buried in his hands, letting his white stepmother fight his battles for him. It was the most pathetic display of cowardice I had ever witnessed. I remained silent, letting Susan fill the void with her own toxicity. "Peyton has had a very hard life, Kendra." Susan continued her tone, taking on that familiar, condescending edge she always used when she wanted to put me in my place. You know she struggles with her anxiety, and this salon was supposed to be her fresh start. But you always have to make everything about you. You are always flaunting your money and your fancy degrees. You walk into our family gatherings acting like you have something to prove just because of where you came from. Jamal did what a good brother should do to support our family. You have more than enough in those accounts. You are acting like an angry, selfish woman over absolute pennies. There it was, the coded language she had been using since the day Jamal introduced us. Angry, selfish, flaunting, having something to prove because of where I came from. For 5 years, Susan had masked her racial and class-based microaggressions behind fake smiles and backhanded compliments at country club brunches. Whenever I celebrated a promotion, she would ask if diversity quotas helped me get there. Whenever I bought a new piece of property, she would loudly wonder why someone from my background needed so much space. Now, with $250,000 of my hard-earned money on the line, the mask was completely gone. She actually believed that, because I grew up in a working-class black neighborhood and fought my way into the elite financial sector, my wealth somehow belonged to their family. She truly believed that $250,000 was pennies and that her daughter was entitled to my labor. Jamal looked up at me from the floor, his eyes red and pleading. He mouthed the words, "Please, just listen to her." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool surface of my desk. I positioned my face inches from the speaker microphone. "Susan," I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly measured. "If you feel so passionately about funding Peyton's vanity projects, you are more than welcome to liquidate your own retirement accounts. You can take out a second mortgage on your house. You can sell your country club membership, but you will not spend a single dime of my money. The funds are frozen, the wire is canceled. Peyton is getting absolutely nothing." Susan gasped dramatically on the other end of the line. "You listen to me, Kendra. You have no right to treat us this way. Jamal is your husband, and what is yours is his. You are going to call that bank right now, or I will make sure everyone knows exactly how aggressive and vindictive you really are." I did not raise my voice. I did not give her the satisfaction of an argument. "Have a terrible morning, Susan." I reached out and pressed the disconnect button, cutting off her shrill protests mid-sentence. The silence rushed back into the office, heavy and absolute. I turned my full attention back to the man kneeling on my floor. Jamal had stopped crying. He was staring at the phone console as if he could not believe I had just hung up on the woman he spent his entire life trying to appease. "Get up," I commanded. He scrambled to his feet, wiping his face with the back of his hand, smoothing down the front of his wrinkled designer suit. He looked like a scolded child waiting for his punishment. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a blank notepad. I did not break eye contact with him. "You are going to leave this building right now," I told him. "You are going to go back to my house. You will pack your clothes, your shoes, and whatever personal items you can fit into the trunk of your car. You will leave your house keys and your garage clicker on the kitchen island. You will be completely out of my home by noon today. If you are still on my property at 12:01, I will have the local police physically remove you for trespassing. Do you understand me?" I expected him to beg again. I expected him to drop back down to his knees and offer me a million empty promises about going to therapy or paying the money back. I expected him to grovel, but that is not what happened. I watched a chilling transformation take over his body. The desperate, panicked husband vanished. His shoulders straightened. He rolled his neck, cracking the joints. He reached up and slowly adjusted his silk tie, pulling the knot tight against his collar. The tears had completely dried. His face morphed into a cold, arrogant mask. A slow, deeply unsettling smirk spread across his lips. He looked down at me, sitting behind my desk, and let out a short, harsh laugh. "I am not going anywhere, Kendra," he said. His voice was no longer shaking. It was steady and dripping with toxic confidence. I raised an eyebrow, refusing to show even a hint of surprise at his sudden shift in demeanor. "You have exactly 3 hours, Jamal. Do not test me." He stepped closer to my desk, placing both of his hands flat on the mahogany surface, leaning in to invade my personal space. "You really think you are the smartest person in the room? Do not you, he sneered. You sit up here in your corner office moving millions of dollars around, treating me like I am just some accessory you bought. You thought you could just control the finances and keep me on a tight leash. You thought you could just freeze me out and kick me to the curb the second I decided to take what I deserve. I stared back at him, completely unbothered by his posturing. You are a thief, Jamal. You are a fraud. And by noon you will be a homeless fraud. Jamal threw his head back and laughed loudly. The sound bounced off the glass walls of my office. You cannot kick me out, Kendra, he said, flashing a wicked, triumphant smile. You do not have the authority to kick me out of anywhere. I kept my expression blank, waiting for his punchline. I transferred the deed of the house to my dad's real estate holding company last week, he announced proudly. He watched my face closely, hungry for a reaction. When I did not gasp, he leaned in even closer, delivering his final blow. Remember that power of attorney you signed last month for the joint tax audit? You were so busy closing your deals, you barely even glanced at the paperwork before you scribbled your name on the dotted line. I took that document right to Elias's lawyer. We executed a quitclaim deed. We legally transferred the entire property into Elias's LLC. My dad owns the house now, Kendra. Peyton is getting her salon and my family owns the roof over your head. He stood up straight, admiring his own handiwork, brushing imaginary dust off his lapel. So if anyone is packing their bags today, it is going to be you, he said, turning toward my office door. You have until noon to get your designer shoes out of my father's property. You are the one who is homeless. He grabbed the brass handle, yanked the heavy oak door open, and marched out of my office, leaving the door wide open behind him. He walked past my assistant with a smug, arrogant strut, looking like a man who had just conquered the world. I sat perfectly still in my high-backed leather chair. I looked at the open doorway. I looked at the empty space where my husband had just been standing. I reached out and gently pulled the door shut, using the remote button on my desk console. I did not panic. I did not rush to pack my bags. I did not call the police. I picked up my cell phone, navigated to my contacts, and pressed dial on the very first name on my favorites list. It was time to show Jamal what a real corporate predator looks like when she closes the trap. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving me entirely alone in the quiet expanse of my corner office. Jamal actually believed he had delivered a fatal blow. He walked out of here with his chest puffed out, convinced that a forged piece of paper and a backroom deal with his father's shady limited liability company was enough to render me homeless and broken. I did not panic. I did not scramble to pack my belongings into cardboard boxes. I simply picked up my cell phone and pressed the dial button for Tariq. Tariq is not just a corporate attorney. He is a legal assassin. We grew up in the exact same working-class zip code, clawing our way out of the same struggles to secure our places in the top 1% of the financial sector. He answered on the first ring, his voice sharp and alert. I laid out exactly what Jamal had just screamed in my face, detailing the supposed deed transfer and the involvement of Elias's real estate holding company. Tariq let out a low, sharp whistle through the receiver. He immediately started listing the federal and state statutes Jamal had just violated. He was ready to go to war. Tariq wanted to file an emergency injunction to reverse the deed transfer alert, the county clerk to the fraudulent filing, and have the local authorities pick up Jamal and Elias before the banks closed for the day. I leaned back in my leather chair and looked out at the sprawling city skyline. I told Tariq to hold off. I let him in on the reality of the situation. Jamal was banking his entire master plan on a power of attorney document I signed last month for our joint tax audit. What Jamal failed to read in his arrogant, desperate rush to steal my assets was the fine print. I am a senior wealth management consultant. I structure airtight financial fortresses for a living. I did not sign a general power of attorney granting him blanket authorization over my life. I signed a highly restricted, limited power of attorney explicitly bound solely to Internal Revenue Service correspondence for a single fiscal year. That document held absolutely zero legal authority over real estate transfers, asset liquidation, or deed modifications of any kind. For Jamal to take that restricted tax form to an attorney, bypass the mandatory notary protocols, and execute a quitclaim deed transferring my primary residence to his father's company was not a clever legal loophole. It was textbook real estate fraud. It was a massive multi-million-dollar felony. Tariq laughed out loud. It was a dark, predatory sound that echoed through the phone speaker. He told me we had enough concrete evidence to hand both my husband and my father-in-law over to a federal prosecutor by dinner time. Tariq wanted to crush them right now and watch them scramble to explain their blatant criminality. I told him no. I told him to do absolutely nothing. Let Jamal and Elias think it worked, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Let them get completely comfortable. I explained the strategy to Tariq. Jamal and his father were operating on adrenaline and greed. If we struck back right now, they would immediately play the victim, claim it was a clerical misunderstanding, and try to hide behind bad legal advice. I needed them to commit to the fraud so deeply that there was no plausible deniability left. I wanted them to pop champagne. I wanted them to sleep soundly in their beds tonight, truly believing they had successfully stolen my home to fund Peyton's lifestyle. When you are dealing with parasites, you do not swat them away when they first bite. You let them gorge themselves until they are too bloated to run when you finally bring down the hammer. Tariq agreed instantly. He promised to quietly monitor the county clerk filings and build the litigation file in the shadows while we let Jamal hang himself with his own rope. I ended the call and spent the next 3 hours doing exactly what I am paid to do. I analyzed market trends, optimized my clients' portfolios, and closed 2 major acquisitions. I did not shed a single tear for my marriage. Jamal had made his choice. He decided to sacrifice the woman who built him up just to secure a pat on the head from a stepmother and a stepsister who viewed our entire culture as a stepping stone for their own entitlement. Around 3 in the afternoon, the intercom on my mahogany desk buzzed frantically. My assistant sounded highly agitated, warning me that a woman had just shoved her way past the reception desk and was completely ignoring building security. Before I could even press the button to reply, my office door swung wide open. In marched Peyton. She looked like a walking billboard for unearned confidence. She wore a pristine white designer coat draped over her shoulders and swung a quilted leather handbag that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She strutted right into my private workspace, radiating that specific brand of weaponized privilege her mother Susan had taught her to wield since childhood. Peyton honestly believed she was walking into the office of a defeated, broken woman. She expected to find me weeping over cardboard boxes, devastated by the loss of my husband and my home. I did not stand up. I simply folded my hands on my desk and watched her approach. Peyton stopped right in front of me. She reached into her expensive bag with a sickeningly sweet, victorious smile plastered across her face. She pulled out a crisp $20 bill and tossed it casually onto my desk. It landed right next to my keyboard, a physical manifestation of her utter delusion. For a cab ride to a motel, she said, her voice dripping with venomous glee. Since you do not own your house anymore, Jamal and I are celebrating my salon opening at the country club tonight. Peyton stood in the center of my office looking like a walking advertisement for unearned privilege. She genuinely expected me to scream. She wanted a reaction. She wanted the angry black woman stereotype she and her mother constantly projected onto me. I did not give her a single ounce of that satisfaction. I reached out with perfectly manicured fingers and picked up the crisp $20 bill. I smoothed out the creases, folded it neatly in half, and slid it directly into the pocket of my tailored blazer. I looked up at her and offered a smile so cold it could have frozen the glass walls of my office. I thanked her for the contribution. I told her every penny counts when you are building an empire. Peyton rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, theatrical sigh. She crossed her arms over her pristine white designer coat, leaning her weight on one leg. She could not wait to brag. She had been waiting for this moment for years. She launched into a breathless monologue about her new 10-year commercial lease. She boasted that she had secured the absolute premier retail space in the entire Midtown district. She bragged about the floor-to-ceiling windows, the imported marble floors, and the exclusive zip code that would cater to the wealthiest clients in the city. She told me the landlord was extremely selective, but her vision was just so brilliant that they practically begged her to sign the paperwork this morning. She patted her quilted leather handbag, telling me Jamal had finally stepped up as a real man and provided the capital she deserved. I kept my expression entirely neutral while she spoke. I let her run her mouth because the reality of the situation was almost too poetic to interrupt. Peyton did not know she was bragging to her actual landlord. She did not know that a year ago I orchestrated a quiet corporate buyout. I am the silent majority shareholder of Apex Holdings. Apex Holdings is the commercial real estate firm that owns the exact Midtown building she just leased. I literally own the floor she plans to stand on. I own the walls she plans to paint. My legal team drafted the very contract she had blindly signed that morning in her desperate rush to play the role of a successful entrepreneur. She was standing in my office gloating about using my stolen money to pay rent directly back into my own corporate bank account. When she finally finished her breathless speech about her upcoming grand opening at the country club tonight, I leaned forward slightly. I rested my elbows on the desk and folded my hands. I told Peyton I genuinely hoped she enjoyed her champagne tonight. I told her to drink up and celebrate her big moment. Then I kept my voice dangerously soft and offered her a piece of professional advice. I suggested she read the fine print on page 14 of her new commercial lease. I told her to look very closely at the section regarding funds obtained through illicit means and the immediate grounds for asset forfeiture. Peyton scoffed, waving her hand in the air like she was swatting away a fly. She let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She called me a bitter, jealous woman who just could not stand to see another woman succeed. She said I was trying to ruin her big day with empty legal threats because I was losing my husband and my house all at once. She adjusted her designer coat, flipped her blonde hair over her shoulder, and turned her back on me. She strutted out of my office with her heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floors, completely oblivious to the trap that had just clamped shut around her ankles. I watched the door swing shut behind her. The arrogance was blinding, but it made my next moves incredibly simple. I did not even have time to turn back to my computer monitor before the heavy oak door opened again. This time it was Tariq. My corporate attorney did not knock. He walked into my office with a rigid posture and a completely unreadable expression on his face. Tariq is a man who thrives in high-stakes litigation. He never looks rattled, but right now his jaw was clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. He walked straight up to my desk holding a thick, sealed manila envelope. It bore the crest of the private investigation firm we kept on retainer for corporate espionage cases. He did not bother sitting down. He tossed the heavy envelope onto the center of my desk. It landed right where Peyton had thrown her $20 bill. Tariq looked me dead in the eye and told me the situation had just escalated far beyond a simple domestic dispute or a fraudulent property transfer. He told me the private investigators had been monitoring the network traffic connected to the initial wire transfer Jamal attempted this morning. Jamal did not just try to wire $250,000 of my business equity to his stepsister. Tariq explained that while Jamal was locked out of the primary equity account, he panicked. He realized the transfer was frozen, and he tried to find another source of capital to fulfill his promise to Peyton. He used my secure network credentials, which he had illegally cloned to bypass my personal firewall. He routed his connection through my home network to make it look like I was the one initiating the access request. Then he went after my clients. Tariq leaned over the desk, his voice dropping to a low, serious pitch. He told me Jamal had actively attempted to breach the offshore wealth management accounts of 3 of my highest net worth international clients. He tried to initiate blind wire transfers to offshore shell companies, hoping to siphon off fractions of a percent that he thought no one would notice in the daily market fluctuations. He thought he was being a criminal mastermind. Instead, he triggered an automatic federal security tripwire. Tariq tapped the thick envelope on my desk. He stated that the documents inside contained the digital fingerprints, IP logs, and routing requests tracing directly back to Jamal's device. Jamal had crossed international borders with his theft attempts. He was no longer just dealing with a pissed-off wife or a civil divorce court judge. By attempting to access and divert those specific offshore funds, Jamal had just crossed the line into federal wire fraud and international embezzlement. I stared at the manila envelope. The magnitude of Jamal's stupidity was breathtaking. He was willing to risk decades in a federal penitentiary just to fund a luxury hair salon for a stepsister who treated him like an errand boy. Tariq asked me for the green light to hand the file directly over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He said the Cybercrimes Division would have a warrant for Jamal's arrest before the sun went down. He wanted to watch them drag Jamal out of my house in handcuffs today. I placed my hand flat on top of the envelope. I looked up at Tariq and shook my head. I told Tariq we were going to hand the file over to the federal authorities, but not right this second. Jamal and his toxic family thought they had ruined my life today. They thought they had rendered me homeless and broke. They were planning to gather at my house tonight to pack up my belongings and celebrate my downfall. If the feds arrested him right now, Jamal would just cry to his father Elias and play the victim of a misunderstanding. Susan would hire him a defense attorney and blame me for setting him up. I wanted them to feel the absolute peak of their false victory. I wanted them standing inside the house they thought they stole, touching the things they thought they owned. I wanted to look them all in the eyes when the reality of their destruction finally crashed down on them. I stood up from my chair and grabbed my briefcase. I told Tariq to have the federal indictment ready and to contact the authorities for a coordinated strike later tonight. I adjusted my blazer and walked past him toward the door. I had a fake eviction to attend. The 45-minute commute from my corporate headquarters to my upscale suburban neighborhood gave me ample time to transition my mindset. I was no longer just a wealth management consultant closing deals. I was a tactician executing a controlled demolition of the people who thought they could destroy me. I pulled onto my quiet tree-lined street, and the violation of my sanctuary became immediately visible. A massive, generic white moving truck was backed aggressively into my pristine paver driveway. The heavy rear tires were recklessly crushing the imported hydrangeas I had painstakingly planted and cultivated last spring. The heavy wooden front door of my home was propped wide open, secured by one of my expensive cast-iron porch planters. I parked my car neatly at the curb, killed the engine, and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The entryway of my home was a scene of calculated disrespect and destruction. Heavy cardboard boxes were stacked haphazardly against the custom wainscoting, leaving dark scuff marks across the fresh paint. I walked through the grand foyer, my heels clicking against the hardwood, and stopped at the threshold of the main living room. Susan, Peyton, and Elias had effectively formed a looting syndicate inside my own home. They were operating with a sickening level of comfort and entitlement. Peyton was lounging across my Italian leather sectional, holding one of my crystal wine glasses filled to the brim with a vintage Bordeaux I had purchased during a trip to France. She was casually pointing out which pieces of my mid-century modern furniture she wanted the movers to load into the truck so she could use them for her new salon reception area. Susan was standing in the center of the room, orchestrating the entire dismantling of my life. She held a clipboard and was barking harsh directions at two burly movers. She pointed toward the grand staircase, instructing them to grab the rest of the items from the master closet. One of the movers walked past me carrying 3 heavy-duty black plastic garbage bags. The plastic was pulled tight and stretched translucent enough for me to see the contents. Susan had ordered them to strip my closet of my custom-tailored wool suits, my imported silk blouses, and my designer cashmere coats, and stuff them into trash bags like discarded yard waste. Susan turned and finally noticed me standing in the doorway. She did not flinch. She did not look guilty or caught. She actually smiled, a tight, predatory grin that crinkled the corners of her eyes, highlighting her sheer audacity. She told me I was trespassing on private property owned by her husband's holding company. She warned me that if I caused a scene, she would have the movers physically throw me out onto the street where I belonged. She gestured to the garbage bags and told me she was doing me a favor by packing up my flashy corporate costumes because I would not be needing them anymore once I moved back to whatever working-class neighborhood I crawled out of. I shifted my icy gaze to Elias. Jamal's biological father was standing near my marble fireplace, pretending to examine a piece of abstract art to avoid looking at me directly. This was the man who had sat at my dining table for 5 years, eating meals paid for by my hard work, praising my ambition only when it brought prestige or financial benefit to his son. Now he was actively participating in a fraudulent eviction to cover up Jamal's financial crimes and inadequacy. I called his name loudly, demanding he look me in the eye. Elias slowly turned around, placing his hands deep in his pockets. He refused to hold eye contact, looking instead at the expensive area rug beneath his feet. He mumbled his justifications, trying to sound like a rational, authoritative patriarch, but only succeeding in sounding like a coward. He told me to just let it go peacefully, Kendra. He said Jamal deserves half of everything in this house for putting up with my relentless career obsession all these years. He actually had the absolute audacity to tell me that a man needs a wife who makes him feel like a man, not a roommate who emasculates him with her paycheck. He claimed his holding company was simply securing Jamal's rightful marital assets to protect him from a bitter, vindictive divorce. I did not scream at him. I did not waste my breath explaining the federal definition of wire fraud to an older man desperately trying to justify his son's profound mediocrity. I did not pull out my phone to call the local police to report a break-in, because bringing local patrol officers into this house right now would disrupt the massive federal hammer Tariq was currently preparing to drop. I maintained absolute icy composure. I stepped right over the garbage bags filled with my expensive clothes. I walked past Susan, who was still barking empty threats about calling the authorities for trespassing. I ignored Peyton, who was swirling my expensive wine and watching me with a smug, satisfied smirk, expecting me to break down in tears. I walked purposefully out of the living room and into the main hallway. The wide hallway was lined with custom artwork and sleek modern light fixtures. Halfway down the corridor, mounted flush against the painted drywall, was a digital smart thermostat. Susan and Elias scrambled to follow me into the hallway, demanding to know what I was doing and ordering me to exit the premises immediately. I stopped directly in front of the thermostat. I reached out, grabbed the plastic casing with both hands, and ripped it violently off the wall. The plastic casing and digital display clattered loudly to the hardwood floor. Behind the false thermostat, embedded deep into the reinforced studs of the wall, was a matte black biometric wall safe. Susan gasped loudly. Elias took a sudden sharp step back. They had been tearing my house apart for hours, hunting for valuables, emptying my jewelry boxes, and seizing my high-end electronics, but they had walked past this exact spot a dozen times without ever suspecting a thing. I raised my right hand and pressed my thumb firmly against the glowing green optical scanner on the face of the safe. A sharp mechanical click echoed loudly through the silent hallway, followed by the heavy thud of the internal locking bolts disengaging. The heavy steel door dropped open. I reached inside and pulled out a large velvet-wrapped lockbox. I popped the latch and opened it right in front of them, exposing the contents to the bright hallway lighting. Inside sat my late mother's heirloom jewelry. There were thick, flawless gold chains, conflict-free diamond tennis bracelets, and heavy emerald rings with deep generational history and massive monetary value. I stood there holding pristine liquid assets worth more than the entire mortgage of the house, leaving the family completely stunned and paralyzed, realizing they had spent the entire afternoon ruthlessly looting my home, but had completely missed the most valuable items hidden right in front of their faces. The heavy steel door of the biometric safe dropped open, and the ambient light of the hallway caught the flawless facets of the diamonds resting inside the velvet box. Peyton's eyes went wide. She had just spent the last 3 hours commanding movers to stuff my tailored wool suits into garbage bags, but she had completely missed a small fortune hidden right under her nose. Her greed was an ugly physical thing. I could see the exact moment her brain bypassed basic logic and went straight to entitlement. She genuinely believed that because she had a fraudulent piece of paper from her stepbrother, everything in my home belonged to her. She lunged. Peyton actually threw her body forward across the space between us with her manicured hands, outstretched like a ravenous animal, trying to snatch the velvet box right out of my grip. She started screeching at the top of her lungs, claiming that those jewels were part of the marital estate, and that half of them legally belonged to Jamal, which meant they belonged to the family. She severely underestimated my reflexes. I did not flinch or back away. I shifted my weight, planted my heels into the hardwood floor, and shot my free hand out. I caught Peyton right by her narrow wrist mid-air. I did not just hold her back. I twisted her wrist downward, using her own reckless momentum against her, and slammed her arm flat against the cold surface of the granite kitchen counter. Peyton gasped in shock, her face hitting the polished stone. She struggled, trying to pull back, but I locked my grip, applying just enough pressure to let her know exactly who was in control. I leaned in so close I could smell the overpowering sweet scent of her designer perfume. I lowered my voice to a dead, absolute calm. I made sure every single syllable carried the weight of a threat I fully intended to keep. Touch my mother's property, and I will break your arm before the police get here. I did not shout. I did not have to. The icy conviction in my tone froze the blood in her veins. Peyton stopped struggling instantly. The arrogance evaporated from her features, replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. She looked up at me from the granite counter and realized for the very first time that she was not dealing with the polite, accommodating sister-in-law who smiled through country club dinners. She was dealing with a woman who had clawed her way out of neighborhoods where you fought tooth and nail to protect what was yours. I held her there for 3 agonizing seconds to ensure the message was permanently etched into her mind. Then I released my grip and stepped back, smoothing the lapel of my blazer. The moment my hand left her wrist, Peyton initiated the performance of a lifetime. She collapsed against the kitchen island, clutching her perfectly fine arm to her chest, and began wailing. The crocodile tears flowed instantly. It was a masterclass in weaponized fragility. She shrieked that I had attacked her, that I had tried to snap her bone in half. Susan snapped out of her stunned silence and went into full hysterics. She rushed to her daughter, wrapping her arms around Peyton's shoulders, glaring at me with a look of pure, unfiltered hatred. Susan reached into her pocket and pulled out her smartphone, her hands shaking with rage. "You are a violent thug!" Susan screamed at me, her voice cracking with the racist coding she had been dying to use out loud for 5 years. "You belong in a cage. I am calling the police right now, and I am going to make sure you are locked up for assault." I watched her dial 911. I did not try to stop her. I did not run toward the door. I calmly picked up the velvet box containing my mother's legacy, snapped the lid shut, and tucked it securely under my arm. I pushed the heavy steel door of the biometric safe closed, hearing the internal bolts lock back into place. Elias was pacing near the front door, rubbing the back of his neck. He looked terrified. He knew that bringing law enforcement to this house while they were in the middle of conducting an illegal, fraudulent eviction was a catastrophic mistake, but he was too much of a coward to stop his wife. He just kept muttering under his breath about how this was getting out of hand. I walked past them and took a seat on one of the armchairs the movers had not yet loaded into the truck. I crossed my legs and watched Susan perform for the emergency dispatcher. She paced the foyer, breathless and frantic, painting a terrifying picture of an aggressive, unhinged woman who had just violently assaulted her daughter. She gave the dispatcher my home address, screaming that they needed officers here immediately before I hurt someone else. It was the ultimate betrayal disguised as self-defense. Susan knew exactly what she was doing. She knew the historical danger of calling the police on a black woman and feeding them a fabricated story about a violent threat. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to see me dragged out of my own home in handcuffs to validate her own superiority. She hung up the phone and glared at me with a triumphant, vindictive sneer. "They are on their way," she spat, gripping Peyton tightly. "You just ruined your own life, Kendra. Jamal is going to take everything you have left." I did not respond. I simply sat in my chair, holding my mother's jewelry, listening to the silence of the house. 10 minutes passed in agonizing tension. Peyton continued to whimper softly, rubbing her wrist while Susan glared daggers at me. Elias stood frozen by the window watching the street. Then the flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness of the evening. They reflected off the large bay windows, casting rapid, chaotic shadows across my living room walls. I heard the heavy tires of the police cruisers pulling onto my driveway, boxing in the unauthorized moving truck. Car doors slammed shut outside. Heavy footsteps marched swiftly up the front steps. Susan practically vibrated with excitement. She grabbed Peyton by the hand and rushed toward the grand entryway, ready to play the traumatized victim for the arriving officers. The front door was already propped open by the heavy, cast-iron planter from the movers. 3 uniformed officers stormed through the open threshold. Their hands rested near their utility belts, their eyes sweeping the room to assess the threat Susan had so vividly described over the phone. Susan immediately pointed a trembling finger directly at me. "Officer, thank God you are here!" she cried out, her voice dripping with manufactured trauma. That woman sitting right there just violently attacked my daughter. She twisted her arm and threatened to break it. We came here peacefully to collect my son's belongings, and she completely lost her mind. I want her arrested for assault immediately. I did not stand up. I did not raise my hands. I sat perfectly still, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. But the lead officer did not reach for his handcuffs. He did not unholster his weapon. He did not even look at me. He stepped right past Susan, completely ignoring her frantic pointing. He looked around the grand foyer, bypassing the terrified woman begging for my arrest. He fixed his gaze on Elias, who was shrinking back against the wall. The lead officer rested his hand on his radio and spoke with absolute commanding authority. "Is Jamal here?" The lead officer did not even glance in my direction. He stepped right past Susan, who was still standing there with her trembling finger pointed at my face. He looked directly at Elias, who had pressed himself flat against the living room wall. Susan let out a sharp gasp of indignation, demanding to know why the officers were ignoring the violent assault she had just fabricated over the phone. The officer held up a single hand, silencing her instantly. He repeated his question, his voice booming through the grand foyer, demanding to know where Jamal was hiding. Before Elias could stammer out a response, a scuffling sound echoed from the back hallway leading to the garage. The second officer immediately unclipped his radio and sprinted toward the noise. A loud crash rattled the kitchen cabinets, followed by the distinct sound of a body being slammed forcefully against the drywall. Jamal had tried to make a run for it the second he saw the flashing lights pull up to the house. He did not get very far. The officer marched Jamal back into the living room. My husband was breathing heavily, his expensive suit jacket bunched up around his shoulders, and his eyes darting frantically around the room looking for an exit. The lead officer stepped forward and pulled a folded document from his utility vest. He did not lower his voice to spare the family any embarrassment. He announced clearly and methodically that they were executing a high-priority federal arrest warrant. Jamal was not being arrested for a simple domestic dispute. The officer stated the charges out loud, letting the words hang in the heavy air of my living room. Embezzlement, aggravated wire fraud, grand larceny. Jamal's prestigious investment firm had initiated a massive internal audit that morning. They had called the authorities after discovering a staggering deficit in their client escrow accounts. My husband, the man who constantly belittled my career and tried to paint me as an unhinged, paranoid woman, had been systematically draining the life savings of his own clients. He was not a financial genius. He was a degenerate gambling addict. He had been funneling millions of dollars into illegal offshore sports betting syndicates, trying to chase his losses and maintain the wealthy facade he desperately needed to impress his stepmother and stepsister. That was the real reason he had been so frantic to steal my $250,000. He did not just want to fund Peyton's luxury salon. He was suffocating in debt. He thought he could use my clean business equity to quietly replace the stolen client funds before the quarterly audit flagged his accounts. He was trying to buy himself time, and he was willing to leave me completely destitute to do it. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked loudly as the officer locked them around Jamal's wrists. The sound echoed off the high ceilings of my home. Susan completely lost her grip on reality. The smug, entitled woman who had just tried to have me arrested falsely was now hyperventilating, clutching her chest, and screaming at the officers that they were making a terrible mistake. She yelled that Jamal was a respectable financial broker from a good family. She actually tried to grab the officer's arm to stop him from leading Jamal toward the door. The second officer immediately stepped in front of her, placing a firm hand on his utility belt, warning her to back away or face obstruction charges. Peyton was frozen in place. She was no longer clutching her supposedly injured wrist. Both of her hands were clamped over her mouth. The reality of the situation was crashing down on her in real time. The fraudulent funds she needed to secure her luxury salon lease were frozen, and the brother who promised to finance her entire life was currently being read his Miranda rights in the middle of my foyer. Her golden ticket had just evaporated. Jamal looked back at me as the officers dragged him toward the open front door. His eyes were wide and pleading, begging me to intervene, begging me to call Tariq and fix the mess he had created. I did not move a single muscle to help him. I looked at him with absolute profound indifference. He had made his choices and now the bill was due. I adjusted my grip on the velvet box containing my mother's heirloom jewelry. I looked at Susan, who had collapsed onto her knees on the hardwood floor, sobbing uncontrollably, while Elias stood uselessly beside her, too terrified to speak. I walked slowly toward the front door. I stepped deliberately right over the black plastic garbage bag containing my expensive tailored suits. I did not say a single word to any of them. I walked out of my house, leaving the front door wide open behind me. I left them standing in the middle of my living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes trapped in the wreckage of their own spectacular failure. I climbed into my car, locked the doors, and drove away into the cool evening air. I did not look back in the rearview mirror. I drove straight to the luxury hotel downtown where Tariq had already secured a penthouse suite under a corporate alias. 3 days passed in absolute peace. I operated my business remotely from the expansive hotel suite, looking out over the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. I drank premium coffee, closed my deals, and let Tariq handle the chaotic fallout happening across the city. The federal authorities had moved quickly. They had frozen every single account associated with Jamal's name. The illegal deed transfer had been flagged by the county clerk and blocked thanks to the trap I had set. Elias's holding company was now under investigation for receiving fraudulent property. The entire family was drowning in legal fees and panic. On the evening of the third day, the phone on the hotel desk rang. It was the lobby concierge. He sounded apologetic, informing me that a man claiming to be my husband was causing a scene at the front desk, demanding to be let up to my suite. I could have told security to throw him out onto the street. Instead, I told the concierge to send him up. I wanted to see exactly what desperation looked like. 5 minutes later, a timid knock sounded at my door. I unlocked it and swung it open. Jamal stood in the hallway looking like an absolute ghost of the arrogant man who had marched into my office just days ago. His $3,000 custom suit was deeply wrinkled and stained. He had not shaved in days. Dark, heavy bags hung under his bloodshot eyes. Elias had to liquidate his own retirement savings just to post Jamal's federal bail that morning. Jamal was a free man for the moment, but he was completely broke and facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. He walked into the suite hesitantly, looking around at the luxurious surroundings, while he reeked of stale sweat and sheer panic. He immediately started babbling, his words tripping over each other. He told me his accounts were completely locked down. The federal government had seized his assets. His defense attorney was demanding a massive retainer fee by the end of the week just to begin reviewing the discovery files. He begged me to drop the specific wire fraud charges I had filed regarding the attempted theft of my business equity. He pleaded with me to contact my bank and unlock the joint accounts so he could access the funds to pay his legal team. He swore he would pay me back every single dime once he beat the federal case. He promised he would cut Susan and Peyton out of his life forever if I just gave him this one lifeline. I walked over to the sleek marble kitchen island in the center of the suite. I did not say a word. I just let him talk and exhaust himself with empty promises. Jamal realized his frantic begging was not working. He stopped pacing. He took a deep breath, trying to shift his strategy. He walked over to the kitchen island and stopped a few feet away from me. He dropped his head, looking up at me through his eyelashes, trying to summon the charm he used to win me over years ago. He slowly lowered himself down, placing his hands firmly on his knees, adopting a posture of total surrender. He dropped his voice to a soft, desperate whisper, trying to play the ultimate emotional manipulation card. "Remember when we had nothing, Kendra?" He pleaded, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "Remember when we were just starting out, working our way up from the bottom? We built this incredible life together. You are my wife. We are supposed to protect each other against the world. I made a terrible mistake, but I am still the man you married. You have to save me. You cannot let them take me away." I looked down at the man I had spent the last 5 years supporting, uplifting, and defending. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I reached out and picked up a heavy crystal glass from the counter. I slowly poured myself a generous measure of an expensive deep red wine. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the rich flavor while Jamal stayed bent over holding his breath, waiting for me to grant him salvation. I set the wine glass down. I reached across the marble island and picked up a thick stack of freshly printed papers. They were crisp and warm from the Hotel Business Center printer. I turned around facing him completely. I looked down into his desperate, pleading eyes, and a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I held the stack of freshly printed papers in my left hand and took another slow sip of my wine. Jamal was still kneeling on the floor of my hotel suite, looking up at me like a dog waiting for a scrap from the dinner table. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I simply looked down at the first page of the stack and began to read his own words right back to him. I cannot stand how she acts at these dinners, Peyton. You can take the girl out of the hood, but she still acts like she is fighting for scraps. I read the text message, clearly making sure my enunciation was flawless. I flipped to the next page. Do not worry about the salon funding pay. She is just a cash cow anyway. I am making sure we are secure before I drop the papers on her. I am going to level the playing field so you can have your dream. I paused and looked down at my husband. The desperate, pleading expression on his face had completely evaporated. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking physically ill. He realized in that exact moment that I had known everything from the very beginning. He realized that when he was screaming at me in the lobby of my office building, accusing me of being a paranoid wife, I already possessed his entire digital history. You wrote that on a Tuesday, I told him, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You sent that message to your stepsister while you were sitting in the living room of the house that I paid for drinking the expensive bourbon that I bought you. You mocked my roots. You mocked the very work ethic that kept a roof over your head and funded your pathetic attempts to look like a successful broker. Jamal opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He raised his hands, palms facing up, trying to formulate an excuse, but his brain was short-circuiting. He had no defense. There was no misunderstanding to hide behind. I had his exact words printed in black and white. I did not mean it. He finally choked out, his voice trembling. It was just talk, Kendra. I was just trying to make Peyton feel better because she is so insecure. I would never actually leave you with nothing. I smiled. It was a cold, detached expression. I let the stack of text messages slip from my fingers. They fluttered down, scattering across the marble floor around his knees. I reached onto the kitchen island and picked up a single heavy document bound in a blue legal folder. I tossed it down. It landed with a sharp smack, right on top of his scattered lies. Read it, I commanded. Jamal stared at the blue folder. He reached out with shaking hands and flipped it open. His eyes darted across the legal jargon. It was the official voided deed transfer document prepared by Tariq earlier that afternoon. It included a certified letter from the county clerk explicitly rejecting the fraudulent quitclaim deed he and Elias had tried to file. The document highlighted the specific clauses in the restricted power of attorney I had signed, proving definitively that his attempt to sign over my property was legally void. I watched him read the paragraph, confirming that the house remained 100% in my name. I watched the final crushing realization hit him. He was not just facing federal charges for embezzling his client's money. He had absolutely zero assets to his name. He had no house to sell. He had no equity to leverage. He could not afford the massive retainer fee required by a federal defense attorney because he was completely and utterly broke. You have no leverage, Jamal, I said, stating the facts with surgical precision. You have no money. You have no property. You have no wife. You are going to stand in a federal courtroom and face a judge with a public defender by your side because your father is currently under investigation for real estate fraud and your stepmother is completely cut off from my accounts. You are going to federal prison. Jamal dropped the folder. He slumped back, sitting on his heels, breathing rapidly. He looked like a man watching the walls of a burning building cave in on him. Get out, I told him. turning my back to place my wine glass in the sink. If you are still inside my hotel suite in 60 seconds, I am calling security to drag you out by your collar. And if you ever try to contact me again, I will ensure the prosecutors add harassment to your federal indictment. I did not turn around to watch him leave. I heard the frantic scrambling of his shoes against the marble floor. I heard his ragged breathing as he rushed toward the entryway. The heavy hotel door slammed shut, vibrating the walls of the suite. He was gone. While Jamal was spiraling toward a federal conviction, Peyton was fighting a completely different kind of war across the city. Tariq kept me thoroughly updated through his network of private investigators. The $250,000 wire transfer I had frozen sent an immediate shockwave through Peyton's meticulously curated fantasy life. Peyton had already signed the 10-year commercial lease for her luxury salon in Midtown. She had already posted the announcement to her thousands of social media followers, bragging about her status as a self-made female founder. She had invited all of Susan's wealthy country club friends, local beauty influencers, and elite socialites to her massive grand opening event. She had hired catering, booked a DJ, and ordered thousands of dollars in champagne. Then her deposit check bounced. The leasing office for Apex Holdings, which I silently controlled, notified her that the funds had been flagged for fraud and forcibly retracted by the federal banking authorities. Peyton was given a strict ultimatum. She needed to provide the $250,000 in certified funds immediately, or her lease would be terminated, the locks would be changed, and she would face a massive breach of contract lawsuit. Peyton was completely desperate. She could not stomach the idea of canceling her grand opening and admitting to her social circle that she was a fraud with no actual capital. She could not face the humiliation of losing the midtown space she had been bragging about for weeks. She needed cash immediately, and traditional banks would not even look at her because she had no verifiable income or assets. So Peyton did exactly what entitled desperate people do when they are backed into a corner. She bypassed the legal banking system entirely. She went to a shadow lender. Tariq uncovered the paperwork through a financial tracer. Peyton had secured a high-risk short-term loan from a predatory lending group known for charging astronomical interest rates and utilizing aggressive collection tactics. But shadow lenders do not hand out $250,000 based on a business plan and a smile. They require hard, tangible collateral. Peyton had none, but Susan did. Susan, the woman who constantly belittled my working-class background while spoiling her daughter rotten, had co-signed the predatory loan. Susan had literally pledged her entire retirement fund and the equity of her suburban home as collateral to secure the cash for Peyton's salon. Susan willingly tied a financial noose around her own neck just to ensure her precious daughter could maintain the illusion of success. They both firmly believed the salon would be an overnight sensation, generating enough revenue to pay off the loan sharks before the crippling interest rates kicked in. It was a spectacular level of financial delusion. The funds cleared. The shadow lenders deposited the money, and Peyton successfully paid the lease deposit to my commercial real estate firm, keeping her grand opening firmly on schedule. She thought she had won. She thought she had outsmarted the system and secured her empire regardless of Jamal's arrest. The next morning, I was sitting at the glass dining table in my hotel suite, reviewing a merger and acquisition file when a sharp knock sounded at the door. I opened it to find a uniformed courier holding a sleek black envelope sealed with gold wax. I signed for the delivery and walked back to the table, breaking the wax seal with my fingernail. Inside was a heavy cardstock VIP invitation to the grand opening of Peyton's luxury salon, scheduled for that exact evening. It was printed with embossed gold lettering, boasting about the elite guest list and the premium champagne reception. Clipped to the front of the invitation was a small handwritten note on personalized stationery. I recognized Peyton's looping dramatic handwriting immediately. I read the words silently, letting the sheer arrogance of her message wash over me. To the woman who funded my dreams. The wire transfer glitch was a minor setback, but true entrepreneurs always find a way to succeed. Do not bother showing up tonight. You are not on the guest list. I set the invitation down on the glass table. I did not feel insulted. I felt a deep, profound sense of anticipation. Peyton had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to finish the job. She wanted to lock me out of the very building I owned. She wanted to celebrate a fraudulent victory funded by predatory loans secured against her mother's retirement. She was inviting the most elite members of her social circle to witness her triumph. I picked up my phone and dialed Tariq. I told him to get his best suit ready. We had a party to crash. I stared at the handwritten note Peyton had sent with the VIP invitation. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of a woman financing a fake empire with money borrowed from loan sharks telling me I was not on the guest list was almost amusing. I did not throw the heavy cardstock invitation into the trash. I placed it gently into my leather briefcase because I fully intended to use it. I left my hotel suite and instructed my driver to take me directly to the financial district. I did not wear my usual understated corporate attire today. Today required armor. I stepped into Tariq's private corner office, wearing a custom-tailored crimson suit that commanded the oxygen in the room the second I walked through the heavy glass doors. Tariq was already waiting at the head of his massive mahogany conference table. The polished surface was completely covered in legal briefs, financial disclosures, background checks, and the commercial lease agreement Peyton had blindly signed just days ago. I walked over to the table and took a seat directly across from him. I looked at the mountain of paperwork that represented the impending destruction of my sister-in-law's entire world. "Tell me we have the kill shot," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Tariq did not smile, but his dark eyes gleamed with the unmistakable thrill of a corporate attorney about to completely dismantle a target. He pushed a thick stack of stapled documents across the table toward me. He explained exactly how Peyton had sealed her own fate. When Peyton's initial deposit check bounced, because I initiated the federal freeze on my stolen business equity, she panicked. She could not stomach the idea of canceling her grand opening and admitting to her wealthy social circle that she was a fraud with zero actual capital. So she bypassed the regulated banking system entirely and went to a predatory shadow lender to secure the cash to save her lease. But Apex Holdings, my commercial real estate firm, does not use standard boilerplate lease agreements. We cater to an elite corporate clientele in Midtown, and our contracts are built to protect our assets with ruthless precision. Tariq pointed to a specific paragraph highlighted in bright yellow ink on page 14 of the lease document. It was the Financial Solvency and Morality Clause. Tariq explained that this specific clause explicitly states that any tenant utilizing unverified, fraudulent, or high-risk predatory lending to fund their build-out, their deposit, or their operating costs is an immediate and incurable breach of contract. By bringing unregulated shadow lenders into my building, Peyton had legally voided her own lease the exact second she put her signature on the dotted line. Tariq broke down the mechanics of the default with surgical detail. The specific shadow lenders Peyton used were currently under active investigation by the State Attorney General for extortionate collection practices and money laundering. By funneling their dirty money through my corporate escrow account to pay her rent, Peyton had exposed Apex Holdings to potential federal financial liability. That exposure gave me the absolute legal right to initiate an immediate emergency commercial eviction. There was no 30-day notice required. There was no grace period to cure the default. There was no negotiation. The contract stipulated that in the event of illicit financial exposure, the landlord reserved the right to seize the premises and all assets within it immediately to mitigate potential damages. Peyton had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last few weeks preparing for this grand opening. She had purchased custom imported Italian styling chairs, solid marble reception desks, premium lighting fixtures, and thousands of dollars in high-end beauty inventory. All of that expensive equipment was now sitting inside a commercial building that I owned. It was paid for by loan sharks, and because of the lease violation, it was now legally subject to my corporate asset forfeiture protocols. Peyton was going to lose every single item inside those four walls. And the most poetic part of the entire trap was Susan's involvement. Tariq handed me the loan origination documents his private investigators had unearthed. Susan, the woman who spent years looking down her nose at my working-class background, had co-signed the predatory loan to save her daughter's pride. Susan had literally pledged her entire retirement fund and the equity of her suburban home as collateral to secure the cash for Peyton's salon. When I locked Peyton out of the building tonight and seized her business assets, she would immediately default on the loan sharks. Susan was going to lose her house, her retirement, and her precious country club status to cover the debts of a failed hair salon. They handed me the exact tools I needed to bankrupt them both simultaneously. I leaned back in my chair and tapped my manicured fingernails against the polished mahogany wood. The legal trap was completely flawless. It was a masterpiece of financial warfare executed in total silence while they were busy picking out champagne flutes. What about the building access? I asked, shifting my focus to the physical execution of the plan. Peyton has been bragging on social media all week about the state-of-the-art electronic security system she had installed to keep the wrong kind of people out of her luxury establishment. Tariq let out a low, dark chuckle that resonated through the quiet office. He reminded me that as the sole owner of the building, my holding company maintained ultimate administrative control over the digital infrastructure of the entire property, including the server that managed the electronic locks. Tariq reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek matte black magnetic keycard. He placed it on the desk and slid it slowly across the smooth surface until it rested right in front of my hands. The central security mainframe was updated and reprogrammed exactly 1 hour ago. Tariq stated, his voice dropping to a serious, authoritative pitch. The building manager purged the entire system. As of midnight tonight, every single access code Peyton programmed into those doors will be permanently wiped. Her key fobs will be completely useless pieces of plastic. The digital locks will automatically reject her staff, her vendors, and her elite clients. That black card right there is the master administrative override. It gives you total unrestricted access to every square inch of the property, and it overrides any localized security measures she thinks she controls. I looked down at the black master keycard. The plastic was cool and heavy in the palm of my hand. I picked it up and slid it deliberately into the inner pocket of my crimson blazer, right next to Peyton's arrogant, handwritten invitation. The adrenaline running through my veins was cold and focused. I looked across the table at Tariq, who was already closing his legal folders and packing the documents into his leather briefcase. "Call the private security team," I instructed, my voice echoing with absolute unyielding authority in the quiet conference room. "Tell them to meet us at the Midtown property in exactly 1 hour, fully uniformed and ready for an asset seizure. It is time to attend a party we were not invited to." The tires of the black town car glided to a smooth halt against the curb in the heart of the Midtown commercial district. I sat in the back seat next to Tariq, looking out through the tinted glass. The storefront Peyton had leased occupied the most coveted corner lot on the entire avenue. Floor-to-ceiling windows proudly displayed the sheer financial delusion happening inside. It was a circus of unearned luxury and fabricated prestige. I could see the imported Italian leather styling chairs lined up perfectly against the mirrored walls. The custom marble reception desk Peyton had bragged about sat front and center, gleaming under the expensive ambient lighting. Waiters in crisp black uniforms circulated through the dense crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with premium champagne and high-end hors d'oeuvres. Local beauty influencers were clustered near a floral backdrop, holding up bright ring lights to capture content for their followers. It was a spectacular illusion of success, funded entirely by the predatory shadow lenders who currently held the deed to Susan's suburban home. Through the thick glass, I spotted Susan holding court near the center of the room. She was in her absolute element. She wore a tailored emerald gown that screamed old money and gripped a crystal champagne flute. She was surrounded by a tight circle of her wealthy country club friends, women who practically breathed judgment and exclusivity. Susan was gesturing broadly, throwing her head back in loud, theatrical laughter. I could read her lips from the street. She was boasting about Peyton's unmatched brilliance, her entrepreneurial spirit, and the sheer determination it took to launch a luxury empire. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Susan knew exactly where Jamal was tonight. She knew her stepson was currently sitting on a metal bench in a federal holding cell, stripped of his custom suits, and facing a decade in prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. She knew her husband Elias had just liquidated his entire retirement portfolio to secure Jamal's bail, which had not even been processed yet. But Susan would never let a federal criminal indictment ruin her daughter's big night. She would never risk the humiliation of canceling a high society event and having to explain to her elite country club circle that her family was actively imploding. She chose to smile, drink champagne, and pretend the nightmare was not happening. I scanned the room and found Elias. He was standing alone near a structural support column, clutching a glass of scotch like a life preserver. He looked physically ill. His posture was slumped, his skin possessed a grayish pallor, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. He was a broken man, trying to hide in plain sight, terrified that the federal agents might walk through the doors at any moment to question him about his holding company's involvement in Jamal's fraudulent deed transfer. I turned away from the window and looked at Tariq. He adjusted the cuffs of his dark navy suit and nodded. The two massive private security contractors we had hired sat in the front seats of the vehicle waiting for my command. I smoothed the lapels of my custom-tailored crimson blazer. I did not look like a woman who had just been betrayed by her husband. I looked like the executioner who had come to collect the debt. I opened the car door and stepped out onto the pavement. The crisp night air did nothing to cool the adrenaline rushing through my veins. Tariq stepped out behind me, followed immediately by the two security guards. Their sheer physical size and imposing black tactical suits sent a very clear message. We were not here to mingle. I walked toward the heavy glass double doors of the salon. The building security guard positioned outside saw us approaching. He reached for the handle to pull the door open, but I did not break my stride. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the sleek matte black magnetic master keycard, and pressed it flat against the digital scanner mounted on the brick exterior. A sharp electronic beep echoed onto the street. The heavy magnetic locks disengaged, instantly recognizing my ultimate administrative authority over the property. I pushed the glass doors open and stepped into the suffocating heat of Peyton's fake empire. The air inside was thick with the overwhelming scent of expensive floral perfume and chemical hairspray. A DJ stationed on a raised platform near the back of the room was blasting a heavy thumping house music track that vibrated the floorboards beneath my heels. I did not pause to acclimate to the environment. I walked straight into the dense crowd flanked closely by Tariq and my security detail. Our entrance was not subtle. The sheer predatory energy radiating from our formation caused an immediate physical reaction in the room. The crowd of influencers and socialites instinctively parted, creating a wide, clear path through the center of the salon. People lowered their champagne glasses. The influencers dropped their ring lights. Conversations abruptly ceased as guests turned to stare at the woman in the crimson suit marching through the party with an entourage that looked ready for war. The DJ, a young man hired to keep the energy high, noticed the sudden shift in the room's dynamic. He looked up from his mixing board, saw my two massive security guards staring dead at him, and visibly panicked. He immediately reached down and pulled the master volume slider back. The thumping bass bled out of the speakers, rapidly fading into absolute silence. The sudden lack of music left only the confused, uncomfortable murmurs of the elite guests echoing off the imported marble floors. Peyton was standing near the custom reception desk, accepting a compliment from one of Susan's country club friends. The sudden silence caused her to turn around. The arrogant, victorious smile she had been wearing all evening dropped from her face so fast it looked physically painful. Her eyes locked onto me. A violent shade of angry red flushed up her neck and instantly stained her cheeks. She was wearing a stunning white silk designer dress that she had undoubtedly purchased using the loan shark funds. She slammed her champagne glass down onto a side table with so much force that the fragile crystal stem nearly snapped and the expensive liquid sloshed over the rim, staining the polished marble. She abandoned her VIP guests and marched aggressively across the salon floor, stomping her heels into the ground. She closed the distance between us, stopping just inches from my face. She did not care that her wealthy friends were watching. Her absolute entitlement overrode any sense of public decorum. She jabbed a manicured finger aggressively toward my chest, her voice shrill and echoing loudly in the quiet room. "I specifically told the building security downstairs not to let you inside this property," she shrieked. "You are trespassing, Kendra. You have absolutely no right to be here. Get out of my salon right now before I call the cops and have you dragged out in handcuffs. Susan noticed the commotion and abandoned her circle of country club wives. She rushed over, her emerald gown swishing around her ankles. She grabbed Peyton's arm, trying to pull her daughter back, while casting terrified, panicked glances at her wealthy friends to see if they were listening to the unhinged display. Susan hissed at me under her breath, demanding that I leave immediately before I ruined the most important night of Peyton's life. Elias stayed glued to his structural column, watching the confrontation unfold with wide, terrified eyes. He knew exactly what Tariq's presence meant. He knew the legal slaughter was about to begin. I did not raise my voice. I did not swat Peyton's aggressive finger away from my face. I simply looked at her. I looked at this deeply delusional woman threatening to call the police on me, while her own stepbrother sat in a federal holding cell waiting for his arraignment. The sheer breathtaking irony of her threat almost made me smile. I did not offer her a single word of response. I simply stepped forward, forcing her to physically stumble backward to avoid a collision. I brushed my crimson blazer right past her shoulder. Tariq and the two security guards seamlessly stepped into the gap, acting as an impenetrable human wall, blocking Peyton and Susan from following me. I walked with absolute terrifying purpose straight through the parted crowd toward the raised platform at the back of the room. The guests watched me in stunned silence, parting further to clear my path. I reached the small set of stairs leading to the DJ booth and stepped up onto the platform. The young DJ took one look at the cold determination in my eyes and immediately backed away from his equipment, raising his hands in surrender. I reached out and wrapped my fingers firmly around the silver microphone resting on the stand. I pulled it loose from its metal clip and turned slowly to face the entire room. I held the cold metal of the microphone. The thumping bass was gone, leaving a vacuum of silence so profound you could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. I locked eyes with Peyton, who stood frozen at the base of the platform. Then I swept my gaze over Susan and her tight circle of elite, pearl-clutching country club friends. "Good evening!" My voice boomed through the high-end sound system bouncing off the imported marble floors. "I am Kendra, and as the majority shareholder of Apex Holdings, the commercial real estate firm that owns this exact building, I want to formally welcome you all to my property." The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. The local beauty influencers immediately raised their phones, hitting record to capture the spectacular implosion of high society. Peyton physically recoiled as if she had been struck across the face. Her jaw went slack. The crisp white designer dress she wore suddenly looked like a cheap costume. She looked around the room, her eyes wide and panicked, searching for a lifeline that did not exist. Susan, however, snapped into a blinding, entitled rage. Her emerald gown flashed under the ambient lighting as she lunged forward, clawing her way up the short steps to snatch the microphone from my hand. She genuinely believed she could simply physically silence me the way she had tried to emotionally silence me for the past 5 years. She did not make it past the first step. My two massive private security guards moved with terrifying precision, stepping squarely in front of her. They formed an impenetrable human wall of black tactical gear. Susan slammed into them, bouncing off their solid frames, and stumbled backward into Elias, who had to grab her by the shoulders to keep her from falling flat onto the floor. "I do not lie, Susan," I stated, my voice echoing evenly and coldly across the stunned room. "I acquire." With my free hand, I reached inside my crimson blazer. I pulled out the heavy stapled commercial lease agreement. I held it high up for the entire room to see, making sure the VIP guests and the rolling smartphone cameras caught every single angle of the legal document. "Peyton," I said, looking down at my trembling sister-in-law, "you were so desperate to play the role of a self-made female founder that you blindly signed a 10-year commercial lease with Apex Holdings without ever checking who actually sat on the board of directors. I am Apex Holdings." I let that reality sink in, watching her eyes dart frantically toward the exits as the profound humiliation took root. Her entire identity, her grand debut to the Midtown elite, was financed by my money and hosted under my roof. But I was not finished. Furthermore, I continued flipping to the page Tariq had highlighted in bright yellow ink. "You funded this entire vanity project using predatory shadow lenders Because your legitimate deposit bounced when I froze my stolen equity. You tied this establishment to illicit financial exposure and unregulated loan sharks. By utilizing fraudulent high-risk loans to secure this space, you have immediately and incurably voided your lease under Section 4B. I tossed the heavy lease agreement off the platform. It fluttered down through the dead silent air and landed right at Peyton's expensive designer heels. You are officially a trespasser on my property, I announced, projecting my voice to the very back of the salon. And all assets within these four walls, including your custom Italian styling chairs, your imported marble reception desk, and every drop of that premium champagne, are now subject to immediate corporate seizure. Peyton finally snapped out of her paralyzed state. She stomped her foot against the marble, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated desperation. She realized her wealthy friends were watching her get dismantled piece by piece. "She is lying!" Peyton screamed, her voice cracking as she turned wildly to her elite guests. "She is a bitter, jealous fraud. She is just my brother's angry wife trying to ruin my night. Someone call the police right now and have her arrested." Right on cue, the heavy glass double doors at the front of the salon burst violently open. The glass shattered against the metal doorstop, sending a sharp cracking noise through the room. Jamal sprinted into the salon. He looked entirely deranged. He was drenched in sweat, his custom-tailored shirt was soaked through, and his expensive tie was completely missing. He pushed violently through the crowd of horrified influencers, knocking over a silver tray of champagne flutes that crashed and shattered across the floor. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as he frantically searched the room. He did not look at me. He locked eyes with his stepsister, waving his arms frantically, and screamed at the top of his lungs, "Peyton, the feds are at the house!" The absolute terror in Jamal's voice ripped through the silent luxury salon like a gunshot. He stood panting in the doorway with shattered glass crunching under his expensive Italian leather shoes. His chest heaved wildly, and his eyes were bloodshot, darting around the room until they finally locked onto Peyton. He screamed the words again, his voice cracking with raw, unadulterated panic. He told her federal agents were currently tearing through their father's house, confiscating computers and freezing hard drives. The socialites and local influencers who had just been sipping premium champagne and basking in the glow of high society suddenly froze. In the circles of the ultra-wealthy, there is no word more radioactive than federal. It implies asset seizures, asset freezing, and criminal association. It is a contagion that no one wants to catch. The elite guests immediately began exchanging horrified glances. Their manicured hands lowered their crystal flutes to the nearest marble countertops. The performative smiles dropped from their faces, replaced instantly by the primal instinct of self-preservation. I stood elevated on the DJ platform, looking down at the absolute wreckage of my husband's pride. I did not flinch at his screaming. I raised the silver microphone back to my lips, ensuring my voice would project with total clarity through the premium sound system. I made sure every single syllable was laced with absolute, unshakable authority. "Everyone in this room has exactly 5 minutes to vacate these premises," I announced, my tone flat and echoing over the speakers. "After 5 minutes, my private security team will lock the front doors and initiate a full commercial lockdown for criminal asset forfeiture. Anyone remaining inside will be considered an active participant in an ongoing federal fraud investigation and will be held on site until the authorities arrive to process the scene." The reaction was instantaneous and spectacular. I watched a room full of people who considered themselves untouchable completely lose their minds. The stampede was immediate. The local beauty influencers scrambled frantically, grabbing their expensive ring lights and designer handbags, shoving past each other in a desperate bid to reach the shattered front doors. They snapped the heels off their expensive stilettos as they ran, terrified that being caught on camera inside a federally flagged property would instantly demonetize their brands. Susan's wealthy country club friends, the exact women she had been boasting to just minutes ago, abandoned her without a single word of farewell. They dropped their champagne glasses, letting them shatter against the imported marble floors, and shoved their way past the barricade of my security guards. They pulled their expensive coats over their faces, hiding from the smartphone cameras that were still recording the chaos. Susan reached out, trying to grab the arm of a woman she had played tennis with for a decade, begging her to stay and vouch for their character. The woman physically violently yanked her arm out of Susan's grasp, looking at her as if she were carrying a plague before sprinting out into the crisp night air. Within 90 seconds, the sprawling luxury salon was entirely empty of guests. The only people left standing in the center of the room were the shattered remnants of the family who thought they could destroy me. Jamal finally spotted me standing above them on the DJ platform. The sheer desperation in his eyes morphed into a frantic, delusional anger. He genuinely believed that because I had played the role of the supportive, accommodating wife for 5 years, I would somehow step in and save him from the consequences of his own actions. He shoved past his stepsister, stepping over the discarded lease agreement lying on the floor, and charged the platform. "Kendra, call them off!" Jamal screamed, waving his arms frantically. He pointed at my corporate attorney, who was standing silently by my side. "Tell Tariq to call his legal contacts and fix this right now. You have to call the bank and unlock the offshore account so I can replace the client funds. They are seizing my father's hard drives. They are going to put me in prison, Kendra. Call the lawyers and tell them it was all a marital misunderstanding." He was begging me to commit federal obstruction of justice to save him from the mess he created by trying to steal my business equity. His arrogance was so deeply ingrained that even while staring down a federal indictment, he still viewed me as nothing more than a tool to facilitate his survival. I did not step back. I handed the microphone to the terrified young DJ who was cowering in the corner of the booth, and I slowly walked down the 3 short steps to the main floor. Tariq matched my pace, stepping smoothly into the space right between Jamal and me. Tariq did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His presence alone was an immovable object. Tariq reached into his tailored navy suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. He held it out, resting it firmly against Jamal's sweat-soaked chest. "This is not a civil dispute," Jamal Tariq stated, his voice cold and clinical. "My client has no authority to call off the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That folder contains the official Internal Revenue Service audit of your brokerage accounts, along with a physical copy of the federal indictment filed against you this afternoon. You are currently facing 27 counts of aggravated wire fraud, international embezzlement, and grand larceny. My client did not do this to you. You did this to yourself the second you tried to access her offshore client routing numbers." Jamal took the folder with trembling hands. His fingers fumbled as he flipped it open. The stark black and white text of the federal seal stared back at him. He read the charges detailing the exact amounts he had siphoned from his own clients to feed his gambling addiction. He read the paragraphs detailing his pathetic attempts to use my restricted home network to mask his international wire requests. I watched his knees physically buckle. He dropped the folder, letting the catastrophic legal document scatter across the marble floor, right next to Peyton's voided lease agreement. He fell to his knees, covering his face with his hands, letting out a loud, ragged sob. Susan was hyperventilating near the custom reception desk, clutching her chest and gasping for air. She looked wildly between her kneeling stepson, her paralyzed daughter, and the ruined empire around her. She turned her desperate, tear-filled eyes toward Elias, expecting her husband to take control and protect his family. She expected the patriarch to step forward and shield them from the consequences. Elias had been standing entirely frozen by the structural column, watching his son weep on the floor and his wife unravel. The self-preservation instincts of a cowardly man are a remarkable thing to witness. Elias realized in that exact moment that the federal agents raiding his home were going to find the fraudulent quitclaim deed linking his real estate holding company to his son's financial crimes. He realized his entire livelihood, his reputation in the community, and his freedom were about to be stripped away. Elias did not walk over to comfort his son. He did not put his arm around his panicking wife. He took a sharp, deliberate step away from them, physically distancing himself from the wreckage. He looked directly at me, raising his hands in a gesture of absolute surrender. His voice rang out through the empty, echoing salon, loud and defensive, throwing the people he was supposed to love directly under the bus. "I had absolutely nothing to do with any of this," Elias yelled, pointing a trembling finger at his wife and his stepdaughter. "Do not let them drag me into this, Kendra. This is all Susan and Peyton's doing." Susan manipulated Jamal. She pushed him into stealing that money because Peyton is a spoiled, entitled brat who could not handle the fact that she is a failure. They orchestrated the entire thing to fund this ridiculous salon. I was just trying to keep the peace in my own house. I never wanted any part of your money. You have to tell the federal agents I was completely ignorant of their schemes. Susan let out a blood-curdling shriek. Her jaw dropped so far it looked painful. She stared at the man she had been married to for over a decade, her eyes wide with total disbelief. She could not comprehend that the moment their systemic privilege failed them, her husband was willing to feed her to the wolves to save his own skin. "How dare you, Elias!" Susan screamed, stepping toward him with her hands balled into fists. "You sat right there at the dining table and helped Jamal plan the real estate transfer. You told him exactly which lawyer to use. Do not you dare try to pin this entirely on my daughter." They were tearing each other apart. The fragile facade of their blended happy family completely disintegrated the second the consequences became real. They were turning into rabid animals fighting over scraps of plausible deniability. I stood perfectly still watching the destruction unfold with a deep, profound sense of satisfaction. I had not laid a single finger on any of them. I had simply forced them to exist in the reality of their own actions. I looked over at Tariq and gave him a single sharp nod. It was time to deliver the final killing blow. Tariq did not say a word. He calmly walked over to the DJ mixing board. He pulled a standard auxiliary audio cable from the sound deck and plugged it directly into the bottom of his highly encrypted smartphone. He tapped his screen, bringing up an audio file he had secured from the private investigation firm just hours ago. He pushed the master volume slider on the mixing board all the way to its maximum limit. A loud, sharp burst of electronic static hissed through the premium speakers mounted in every corner of the luxury salon. The sound cut right through Susan and Elias's screaming match, forcing them both to fall completely silent. Then a voice boomed out of the speakers, echoing off the imported marble and the expensive glass mirrors. It was a crystal-clear, high-definition audio recording. It was the unmistakable booming voice of Elias himself, captured just days ago on a recorded line speaking directly to his son. "Jamal, you need to listen to me very carefully." Elias's recorded voice echoed through the empty room. "You cannot just use the power of attorney as is. Kendra is too meticulous. She will notice the discrepancy. You need to bring the document to my guy at the holding company. Do not go to a standard notary. My guy knows how to bypass the signature verification. We execute the quitclaim deed, we transfer her property directly into my limited liability company, and we wash the asset before she even has time to check the county records. Once the house is in my company's name, we leverage it to cover the funds you lost. We just have to keep Susan and Peyton distracted with this salon nonsense until the transaction clears." The audio file clicked and abruptly ended, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Elias looked like a man who had just been struck by lightning. The blood completely vanished from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. His eyes darted toward the heavy glass doors, looking as though he might physically try to run from the building. He had just heard his own voice broadcasting his exact active participation in a federal real estate fraud conspiracy. He had not just known about it, he had orchestrated the legal bypass. He had weaponized his own holding company to steal his daughter-in-law's home, and he had done it while actively manipulating his own wife and stepdaughter to cover his tracks. Susan turned slowly to look at her husband. The sheer hatred radiating from her expression was nuclear. She realized Elias had not just betrayed her to me. He had been using her and Peyton as disposable pawns from the very beginning. I stepped forward, the hard heels of my shoes clicking against the marble floor. I stopped right in front of Elias, forcing him to look at me. "You should have read the fine print, Elias," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "When you try to bypass a notary using a corporate holding company in this state, the transaction requires a recorded verbal confirmation for the fraud prevention logs. Your own shady lawyer recorded your instructions to protect himself. He handed that recording over to the federal prosecutors the second they threatened his license. You did not just steal from me. You handed the government a recorded confession. I looked down at Jamal, who was still weeping on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of his own destruction. I looked at Peyton, who was standing completely paralyzed, shivering in her expensive white dress amidst the ruins of a business she would never own. I looked at Susan, whose entire social empire and financial future had just been obliterated by the man she married. I turned my back on all of them. I walked toward the glass double doors with Tariq and my security detail falling into perfect formation behind me. I did not look back. I stepped out into the crisp night air, leaving them locked inside a building they did not own, waiting for the authorities to arrive to collect the pieces. 90 days have passed since the night I locked the doors on Peyton's fabricated empire. The calendar flipped forward 3 months, but the absolute devastation I left in my wake is entirely permanent. I drove past the Midtown Commercial District this morning on my way to a client meeting. The premium corner lot that once housed Peyton's luxury salon is completely unrecognizable. Heavy plywood boards cover the imported floor-to-ceiling glass windows she bragged so much about. A massive bright red sign is plastered right across the front entrance displaying the words, "For lease" in bold block letters. It bears the direct contact number for Apex Holdings, my holding company. Peyton did not just lose her retail space, she lost her entire identity. When the shadow lenders realized their collateral was frozen in a sprawling federal fraud investigation, they did not politely ask for their money back. They ruthlessly and systematically gutted her finances. She declared total bankruptcy within 4 weeks of the grand opening massacre. The woman who wore pristine white designer coats and bragged about her exclusive zip code is currently working as a junior receptionist at a discount strip mall salon on the far outer edge of the city. She spends her days sweeping up hair clippings, answering phones, and booking appointments for the exact same working-class women she spent her entire life looking down on. She has no luxury vehicle, no quilted designer handbags, and absolutely no access to my bank accounts. Susan suffered a fate far worse than bankruptcy. She suffered a total and irreversible social execution. The wealthy women at her elite country club, the exact circle she spent decades desperately trying to impress, treated her family's federal fraud scandal like a highly contagious disease. They excommunicated her overnight. Her pristine country club membership was quietly revoked by the board of directors. The predatory loan sharks aggressively pursued the collateral on Peyton's loan, stripping Susan of her entire retirement fund in a matter of weeks. Elias tried to file for corporate bankruptcy to protect his own assets, but the federal prosecutors easily pierced the corporate veil of his real estate holding company. They uncovered his recorded voicemail plotting the deed transfer and seized his suburban house to pay restitution for the fraud. Susan and Elias are currently renting a cramped 2-bedroom apartment miles away from their precious country club. They despise each other more with every passing day, trapped in a prison constructed entirely out of their own greed and racist entitlement. And then there is Jamal, the man who kneeled on the marble floor of my hotel suite and begged me to save him, took a federal plea deal to avoid a highly publicized trial. He traded his $3,000 custom-tailored suits for a standard-issue jumpsuit. He is currently serving a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years in a federal penitentiary. He has no prestigious investment firm, no wealthy clients, and no golden child stepsister to protect him. He gambled his entire life away trying to prove he was the smartest man in the room, and he lost absolutely everything to the woman he thought he could easily discard. I am sitting in the expansive penthouse office of my newly acquired commercial building. The afternoon sunlight is streaming brilliantly through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, warm shadows across the imported hardwood floors. I am wearing a stunning, tailored emerald green suit. It fits perfectly, serving as armor, designed for a woman who builds and protects empires. Resting on the pristine surface of my custom mahogany desk is the final divorce decree. It is a single piece of paper that legally severs my last remaining tie to the parasitic family I left behind in the ashes of their own arrogance. Tariq sits directly across from me. He is relaxed, leaning back comfortably in a plush leather guest chair, holding a small porcelain cup of dark espresso. The legal war is completely over, and we emerged with zero casualties on our side of the board. He takes a slow sip of his coffee, lowers the cup, and looks at me with a quiet, observant expression. He asks me if I feel any regret. He asks if a small part of me feels bad about exactly how hard I systematically dismantled my former husband and his entire toxic family. I turn my high-backed leather chair slightly and look out over the sprawling city skyline. The glass and steel towers stretch out for miles, representing billions of dollars in capital and endless opportunity. I keep my posture perfectly composed. My voice is steady, resolute, and completely devoid of doubt. They thought because I came from nothing and kept quiet, I was weak, I tell him. They mistook my patience for submission. They forgot that the quietest players in the room are always the ones who own the board. I pick up my favorite gold fountain pen. I press the gold nib to the thick paper of the divorce decree and sign my name with a sharp, decisive flourish. I slide the finalized document across the smooth desk toward Tariq. I turn my chair back to face my open laptop, bringing up the financial projections for my next massive corporate move. Now, Tariq, I say, shifting my focus entirely to the glowing screen. Let us look at the zoning permits for that new acquisition in Midtown. The most profound lesson from this journey is that your true worth is absolutely never defined by the toxic limitations or validations of your biological family. True power and ultimate liberation emerge when you stop seeking approval from those committed to misunderstanding you. Financial independence and unshakable self-respect are the perfect armor against manipulation and emotional abuse. When you silently build your own empire, you completely strip away their control. Walking away from a poisoned table is not an act of defeat. It is the greatest victory. You never need to fight for a seat when you own the building. If you have ever had to cut ties to protect your peace and build your own empire, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of undeniable strength and sweet revenge.